If you've been following my work for some time, you know that before getting into plein air painting, I was working predominantly in portrait and figurative art. And so in this video, I'd like to compare some of the portraits that I've done in the past and what are the similarities and differences between portrait painting and painting plein air, being out there looking onto the trees, mountains, sea versus observing somebody's facial expressions. All the artworks shown in this video were done from life, on the spot, whether it's portraits and or landscape or plein air paintings. And each of these works came with its own unique challenges. So let's start with portraiture. When you work from life, having somebody who's posing for you, in this case, this portrait of Avery was done from life in one sitting in 4 hours. The biggest challenge is, of course, to make the person look like themselves, but also to show the person in the most interesting way that you can in this moment. And funny enough, for this portrait, what I thought was really cool is actually the jewelry on my model. So I made sure that the design of the object is not overly detailed, that it complements the face, but also has its own really interesting brushstrokes to describe the portrait. Now, when you compare that to landscape painting, there are certain similarities in that as well. For example, in this case, this is the entrance to the Westmounts greenhouse. I personally thought that the most interesting part about painting this plein air was obviously following the architecture, but also reading a bit of that light to give this freshness of the environment. So each of these paintings has something about it that I personally found interesting, and I tried to translate that into a painting. And so this is another scene. This is a place in Percé in Quebec. It's a really great spot. So I'm going to talk about each of the challenges that I faced while working on these paintings. Just like in my plein air paintings, I spend about 4 hours on each painting. So in my latest plein airs, I pushed it to 5 and sometimes even 6, but 4 is the typical amount of time. 4 hours are just perfect for you to be able to develop something, but also for your model not to get overly tired. So when you're working on the portrait painting, I have a strategy that I like to use where I actually focus the very beginning of my painting around the eyes, because as you paint someone, and even if you take breaks, the person gets tired. So the expression around the eyes, they really change, and you can really observe that. So I like to actually paint the eyes at the very first hour of the painting session. This way I know that I'll capture the most amount of liveliness in my painting. And so I typically split the sessions into 20 or 25 minutes, depending on how the person feels. And so in each of the sections, I'll paint separate parts. So the first part would be general composition, and then I'll go and develop the painting section by section, leaving the background for the very end, because if my model falls asleep, or if I'm just not as energetic as I was at the beginning, it's not as important, because you can be fairly tired and still pull off a decent background. Whereas, yeah, good luck doing that when you're painting the eyes. And if we compare that to painting landscapes or places outdoors from life, you divide your time just the way you would with a portrait. Because the thing is, this painting and this painting, one of the things that that is similar between these two is that the sun moves, and the sun is not waiting for you. So you gotta make sure that whatever you're painting, you're able to complete in one go, without sacrificing the quality or leaving anything out. So just like with portraits, where I focus on the hardest thing at the beginning, what I like to do here with painting places, for example, is that I'll focus on one area at a time. So this was a 4-hour painting, but it was developed section by section. And so, for example, I really liked the way these flowers were were illuminated by the sun. So I made sure to focus and develop this part at the very beginning. Although I had a general idea about the composition, but I made sure to read the light, let's say 30 minutes at a time. So I spent maybe 30 minutes here, move on here, paint some grass. Also, one of the hardest things about painting architectural elements is making sure that things are symmetrical, you are following the perspective, and nothing looks off. Of course, everyone has a different experience going from one subject to another. My background, as I mentioned earlier, is portraiture and figurative art. And so plein air painting, yeah, it was not exactly an easy journey, easy introduction, because plein air painting comes with its own rules. And it's not exactly the same as having a photo and copying a photo in your studio. Plein air painting is an experience of its own, and you gotta be doing your plein airs fully prepared. And one of the main differences is that when you paint a portrait in a studio, first of all, you want your model to be comfortable, and therefore oftentimes you're comfortable, so the temperature in the room is pretty great. You set up lighting, the lighting doesn't move, so the only challenge is to make sure that your model is comfortable and your model doesn't move. And when you do plein air, well, your model is not moving, but everything else is. So the lighting is inconsistent, the lighting constantly moves. You are most often uncomfortable, and here I was getting destroyed by the bugs. While I didn't paint any people here, but there were tons of tourists, so you're constantly distracted. So it's definitely a whole thing of its own, being out and painting what's in front of you, but that's part of the adrenaline. That's part of the joy of being out and making these paintings on the spot. And plein air painting taught me to approach painting a little bit differently. So like I mentioned, with painting people, you always want to focus on, once you have your composition, on the elements that are hardest to capture. And that's why I really like to develop this area first, because this is where I need the most amount of focus, most amount of energy. Whereas in plein air painting, what I realized is that I prefer working on one section at a time. And funny enough, I actually like to add my sky at the very end, because typically the sky gets really beautiful towards the evening. And so when I start during the day, let's say if I paint from 2 p.m. till 7 p.m. or 6:30 p.m., the sky at 2 p.m. won't be as nice and dark as it will be towards the end of the day. And so I'll typically start my day with just building a structure, finding the key element, like, for example, here I would start with this building. I really like the shadow shapes and the light shapes, and I would build that and then just gradually add each and every element by comparing it to the main building that I painted, and then just pushing more and more. And then if there's a beautiful light that falls on the ground, I'll paint that. And so towards the end, I'll just clean up the painting and add this kind of a nice evening sky. In this case, since this was a focal point, I started with this painting, add a bunch of textures, and then it was really cool because this is approaching fog. So I thought it would be kind of cool to add this fog before it fully covers my view. So this was just a short video of my thoughts. I guess you could say some tips on plein air painting and portrait painting, and just the difference and similarities of these two approaches. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about the process, please let me know, and I'll try to address them in my next video. Also, some of these pleinaires are available on my website, so if you want to check out what is available, I'll leave the link down below. Thanks for watching.